The program takes place in 1962 in the Axis power of the parallel universe, including Nazi Germans and the Imperial after winning World War II. The Japanese are now the world's rulers in this universe. The incoming president of the United States, Franklin D., was killed during the war. The Hiroshima bombing and Nagasaki never took place. Instead, the Germans dropped an atomic bomb on Washington, D.C., and undermined the Allied nations in the modern world that all of Europe is ruled by Germans, and Africa and Japan's Empire Asia as a whole. But the PowerPoint takes place in the former United States, which has since split into two sections, one of which is Western Japan is in charge of North America, and North America's eastern and Midwestern regions are under the Greater Nazi Reich's control. The American flag is also known as the GNR, features a swastika in place of stars, demonstrating its total submission to the Nazis despite the fact that both empires prevailed alongside the conflict. There has been a cold. They've always had a warlike relationship, because it is said that following the passing of Hitler's successor, the current Führer command will assume control of all Japanese states and claim to be in charge of the world, and both American empires experience racism and possess fewer rights compared to Japanese and Germans, and the police in each of their states are permitted to murder any American if they suspect them, without having to. There is a neutral zone where you can answer to anyone, between two states that were once part of the United States, and includes the Stony Mountains, that it acts as a rule-free, neutral area of either empire work. It's also the resistance group's hiding place that is continuously voicing opposition to their freedom and rights. Then we are presented to Joe Blake, a resident of weary of being a Nazi occupier of New York. He is seeking to become a slave to the Nazis, join a resistance organization. From many sources, he has at last found the New York address group leader on his way to the stated that we can see Times Square there. Nazi propaganda on billboards and commercials about the Führer. The headquarters is revealed to be a shipping business, with a manager as the leader. Don Joe informs him that he is a Don laughs in Joe's face despite his rebellion. Obtained their address, indicating that he is already eligible to serve as their ally, but Don claims that someone like him will reveal all of their secrets to the Joe alerts the manager to the police if they are caught, that he has a strong will to fight, and Don finally offers him a chance as he is required to drive a truck loaded with coffee makers to Cannon City, Colorado. Is a neutral zone. Joe asks what else is in the truck. Contains, but he is instructed to follow instructions without posing any queries, correct? Before he departs, the location is raided by Joe is able to drive the Nazis away. When Don is apprehended and detained, as it happens, the third highest Nazi officer of rank, Smith, who was once a before he joined hand, the U.S. Army captain with the Nazis and is now devoted to them. When Joe and the truck were mentioned, the Obergluppenfielder gives his people instructions to at all costs. We are able to catch the truck. Transported to San Francisco, where Japan ruled. West Juliana is an Aikido city. Knowledgeable and contented American living under. One day following practice, Japanese control a friend of hers named Doni, who is infatuated with her, asks out on a coffee date, but Juliana discloses that she is already seeing a man named. Later that day, she meets Frank, Trudy's sister, who has been absent. For the Trudy is pleased about something that happened last week, and asserts that her life is going to change for the better than we perceive. Juliana meets the talented artist Frank, but given that Japanese people are not a large, he is a modern art enthusiast who has accepted a position as they converse. A factory mechanic discover that Frank is Jewish and is living in constant fear of the Nazis is the reason Juliana is opposed to having his children, as they will also be terrified each and every day of their survives. After Juliana's date, Trudy stops abruptly on the way home. She gives her a film in a panic and asserts that it is the sole method to freedom, so she runs away, and the police kill him. Juliana sees this a few minutes later, and enters her apartment before playing the movie's content, which is called The Grasshopper Lies Heavy, depicts a world in which Nazis were defeated and the role of global politics out, and Juliana is shocked as she gets a taste of freedom from the video, and inspires her to fight. If she had been displayed a segment of staying up to date with the Kardashians, but she might have chosen to abandon the status quo. After that, we discover the movie is a product that is sold by a person known as the. Not even the high man in the high castle senior officials are aware of his identity or what he desires, but he appears to be an ally to the opposition group with access to the things that ordinary people don't. The government has prohibited these movies, but they still remain. Frank is delivered home in secret, and becomes extremely alarmed upon learning that he wants to give Juliana Juliana a movie. First thing in the morning to the police morning to avoid any problems, the Juliana discovers a ticket the following morning to Cannon City with a time and address that evidently her sister had to bring the movie to that location. But now it's her accountability. When Frank isn't present, she flees to the bus with the movie station that she also conceals the movie under, yet another to conceal the truth. Even if she is apprehended in the subsequent scene, we are brought to the German embassy in a senior position in the Japanese rule empire. Hugo, the Nazi commander, meets the Japanese Tagomi, the trade minister, has arrived to notify them of the arrival of the Japanese prince and princess. Even the German embassy needs to be embellished based on their preferences, which don't satisfy the Germans, but they still consent to do it to prevent unneeded stress. Don has been connected to the ceiling and subjected the open group to torture. And Führer and Eric, his right-hand man, whose name is much simpler to declare that you will meet him, but doesn't mind their presence and keeps quiet while Joe's due to a flat. The truck stops en route. Tyre, as a good-hearted man, assists him in replacing it. When Joe sees ashes in the air, it changes out there, close to the German, are physically and mentally burning people with disabilities because they don't want to squander their funds on them. I suppose an elderly genocidal can't be taught after that. A psychotic call to new tricks. Joe keeps going until he quickly arrives at a police checkpoint of heat. He extracts a film from beneath the truck and conceals it in another location. When the police fail to locate it, they set him free. Like Juliana, Joe's work is also to give the movie to a Cannon City resident. Juliana encounters Randall, a man who is expected to meet her sister, who is also a member of the resistance and believes that Juliana is unfit for the position. They argue over who gets to bring the movie to Cannon City and make a decision. Juliana ought to do it since the recipient of the film believes he is encountering a woman en route to the city. Another woman takes Juliana's bag, who flees with all of her money, and the Juliana continues the journey in a fake movie. Lacking funds but determined to do her sister's job at Frank's workplace first, he and Ed, a co-worker, are conversing regarding politics. Shortly, he and Randall, who earlier Juliana was speaking with, detained for concealing the movie from the police. Juliana arrives at the hotel in Cannon City and awaits the individual she is scheduled to meet. While she's there, Joe, whom she meets, covers her meal. They talk because her wallet was stolen for some time and become friends with each other. Apart from that, we see Joe calling the Obergruppenführer, disclose that he is a spy employed by the Nazis and the person behind Don's arrest returned in San Francisco. Randall and Frank are Officer Quito was tortured and imprisoned, threatens to murder Frank's whole family if he doesn't disclose Juliana's whereabouts later tomorrow. Frank and Randall are abandoned, and the latter requests that Frank not to discuss Juliana with others because her actions are more significant than. In the end, Frank's sister Laura is brought along with her 2 kids, asked to wait at the police station. Quito informs Frank in a room that they are preparing to poison the 3 of them and gives him time to reflect for 30 minutes. Back then in Cannon, Joe's and Juliana's, as the friendship grows, Joe has begun to believe she is a rebellious Juliana, then begins serving as a waitress, and she meets a patron named Alan at the diner. When Juliana is reading a Bible, who is it demonstrates interest in it by giving her the name of a shop where she can purchase the book. She visits the shop while being concurrently observed by Joe in the New York, the Obergruppenfield, and is a group attacks assistant Eric. Obergruppenführer of the rebels is able to murder them all and detain a man named Doug. Will question him somewhere else. Juliana reconnects with Alan and asserts that she needs to share something significant. They agree to meet on a bridge at the evening. Before heading out to the meeting, Joe receives a letter from Juliana asking to mail it to her mom. If she doesn't, Joe calls the Ober group back, asking him in the future to learn more about Alan, a man he believes to be after the call. A rebel reads the letter in which Juliana informed her mother regarding the fantastic world that the movie has demonstrated to her his lack of self-control. Joe also views the movie that he has the ability to perceive a different reality. He has a strong desire in his heart to fight back quickly after learning that Alan is a Nazi spy rather than a rebel. Himself being aware that Juliana's life is, Joe pulls out his gun when he feels threatened and returns to San Francisco and crosses the bridge. Randall is removed to be put to death. Quito requests that Frank disclose Juliana's location for the final time, but he continues to quiet because the toxic gas is released in Frank's sister's room. Laura is in Frank with her kid, also assumed to be carried out in tandem with Randall. Just before he was put to death, Quito locates the thieving woman Juliana on the bus after learning about the phony movie. They believe Juliana and Frank is saved and is innocent just before he passed away, but his family dies as a result of Quito's error after Alan attempts to murder Juliana on the bridge, but is cut short when Joe shows up. Juliana shoves him off the bridge and immediately after she breaks down, kills him. Weeping as Joe embraces embraces her. Joe assists them when they get back to the hotel. Juliana calms down in spite of her guilt about murdering someone who was burdening her. She maintains her composure. She asks if the letter she left for her was read by Joe, mother, to which he responds, yes. Juliana doesn't mind since she has faith in him and believes that the reason he did it was concerned about her. The two must leave the hotel as soon as you can, because a Nazi agent's death indicates that there will be more people searching for them. They decide to check out at various periods to stay clear of suspicion in San Francisco. Frank goes back to his apartment and sleeps with what he has experienced during the past 24 hours has weakened him to the core, and he eventually comes to I'm happy to see his friend alive. But Frank doesn't exhibit any interest in his worries. Frank also obtains a formal letter from the Japanese police regarding a funeral that is held for Laura and her deceased children. He then proceeds to the police station and recognizes the deceased as members of his family. When he's finished with Frank's grief, has become angry and wants to exact revenge. The Japanese for murdering his defenseless family. He has the ideal chance to when the Japanese crown prince and princess reach San Francisco. When Frank gets home, he receives a call from Juliana, but it ends suddenly. Accuses her of causing the deaths, but doesn't wish to be around her until his anger subsides in another location. Joe calls Obergruppenführer and asks whether he has discovered any more rebels. Speaking of Juliana in the dining room, but Joe is lying when he says that he has no suspicion, but he wishes to wait a week to verify. The Obergruppenführer gives orders that don't, since the rebels ought to have arrived now, and their lack only indicates that they discovered the Nazi scheme. Joe accepts and proceeds to a gas station to get ready to return home. Then we are presented with an additional Nazi soldier. Marshall has a reputation for murder, hundreds of insurgents surrounding the neutral zone, and is pure Nazi propaganda. Follower he believes to be Joe and requests his card, which leads to the two of them argue. After confirming, the man reveals Alan's identity as Joe. Image to a passerby, he is the investigator. After Alan vanishes, Joe soon meets Juliana at the eatery and informs her about his memorable encounter with another Nazi. They don't have any more time to defeat the spy around the bush and must quickly leave. Initially, they search the dam as much as they can for Alan's remains and get rid of them, so meanwhile, Marshall won't find it. Marshall visits the bookshop where Alan frequently used to pay a visit to Carl. The owner asserts that he is ignorant until Marshall pulls out a card that contains his real identity. Carl turns out to be a rebel, Ohio refugee. To preserve his life, the Marshal is informed by a man about a girl who came to purchase the Bible at Alan's recommendation. Despite receiving the information, Marshall doesn't spare Carl and terminates his life. Furthermore, he makes a statement by displaying his lifeless body in front of telling everyone to let it rot. He then carries on with his search and finds itself outside the restaurant where Juliana claims to know someone who works there. Alan is there, but he requests money in turn to the data that Marshall provides. He leaves after disclosing everything he knows. For the bridge, after learning that Alan was last seen in the Crown Prince, San Francisco, and princesses strolling through a park with numerous council members following the event. In private, the prince informs the princess about his worries about the Nazis expanding technologies, surpassing Japan in a variety of ways, and must be halted before a new global conflict starts out following Hitler's passing. In the following scene with Trade Minister Tagomi conversing with Wegner, a Nazi scientist. They're here to make a crucial agreement that could significantly affect world history. Wegner is aware of the formula for an atomic weapon that Nazis own, but he is willing to share what Japan lacks. Formula using Japanese science ministers so that the nation is prepared, and Tagomi inquires if they are attacked. Wegner will give the recipe to the Japanese science minister on the day of the speech of the Crown Prince, since it is when everyone will be preoccupied. The Crown Prince and Princess meet the Nazi envoy to talk about. The prince is going to give a speech to a group of San Francisco locals. The ambassador recommends that they call off the speech since it may not be completely secure. However, the monarch has faith in the Quito team to guarantee total safety so that no one would dare to touch him after all, as he is the prince of all Japanese people. Empire back in Cannon City, Joe and Juliana is getting rid of Alan's vehicle. When they discover a map within a designated location piques their curiosity, and they choose to go and see what it is. That Marshall arrives at the same moment as the bridge and discovers Juliana's drawing that she had dropped while she was here last night with Alan. The error could cost her life, but she's occupied. Joe and I exploring the mapped area appears to be a camp where the revolutionaries are tortured and imprisoned. The terrifying image of a dead person in chains, a woman shakes them both together with the corpse, is a compilation of revolutionaries who have been murdered or are not yet. The name of captured Trudy is also present, but the thing that most surprises them is the name of Lemuel, the owner of the diner. This indicates that the individual with whom Juliana has been working currently A rebel marshal is also in. Lemuel is asked by the diner if he has spotted Juliana around town. The proprietor discloses that she was once employed for him but fabricates a story about her disappearance several days ago, but Frank is still not feeling well. He constantly seeks to increase details regarding the Japanese prince by listening continuously to the radio. Then we observe him building a firearm for himself since he is employed at a factory that produces. Ed asks what he needs from its parts, but later on, Frank doesn't respond that Ed witnesses Frank rehearsing his shooting. He carefully asks in his apartment if Frank intends to kill the crown prince, but once more fails to receive. Ed responds by telling Frank to consider each action he takes since he won't be. Police will forgive him if he does in the following scene. Something irrational. Joe and Juliana are traveling back to prior to Marshall stopping them. The diner. Juliana flees for her life and hides inside a deserted house while being pursued by him. After a few minutes of searching, they encounter Marshall and Face are just a few seconds away from destroying her head with his shotgun. However, Joe immediately steps in to help her and knocks out the Nazi and flees. They hide inside a house with Juliana close by, deceiving Marshall into believing that only after he drove did they flee. Do they exhale in relief as he drives away? They go to Lemuel's house to seek safety. Before he asks, he hears their story for the movie she received from Trudy, but Juliana is adamant that she will only give over the movie to the man in the high castle because she lacks faith in others. Otherwise, Lemuel says he will bring them to Joe, the main man. The next morning then shocks us by disclosing all the details to the public group and Theodore Smith, but he doesn't inform him of the section in which he assisted Juliana in the morning arrives, and Lemuel brings Juliana and Joe hiking through the woods, but midway they are encircled by a collection of revolutionaries who acknowledge Joe as a spy. He demonstrates his innocence by the movie that he wouldn't have brought if he was a spy, and Juliana also supports him because he has assisted repeatedly opposing the Nazis. Lemuel expresses regret for the false information and requests that they visit a location on the opposite side of the hill to avoid Marshall, who is in dire need of. Wegner is getting ready for them elsewhere. Microfilm containing instructions on how he is to produce an atomic bomb. This movie about Japanese science minister throughout the speech regarding to occur just a few hours prior to the speech. Frank purchases a number of bullets under a Japanese person's name. The shop's owner lives in Tibet, assists him when a ridiculous amount is offered. Ed discovers the loaded gun and tries to prevent Frank from taking any action. In the resulting conflict, Frank is foolish, wounded in the shoulder, but he survives. Locked himself in a room and made his way. Juliana is attempting to steal the speech, a vehicle for their getaway, but Marshall captures her in the act. She flees in a rush, which led to her getting into an Marshall's accident that kills her. Examines her charred body before verifying that she is indeed dead, but he is unaware that there was a plan in place by Juliana and Joe to remove him from their backs once everything has subsided. When Juliana calls Frank, Ed answers the phone. He tells her everything that Frank has over the phone been willing to encourage her to take the next bus to San Francisco. Joe is right away, observes her go into shock and feels betrayed. In the meantime, in San Francisco, the When Prince's speech finally begins. Wegner is in the throne preparing to transfer the microfilm to the Minister of Science. Frank is getting ready somewhere nearby. He pulls the gun to exact revenge. Slowly, another person fires. The episode concludes with the prince before him observes the wounded prince in surprise. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Leave a comment about your favorite movie and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.